Hello, everybody. At least hopefully you can hear me and see me and see little kitty, who's apparently sad for some reason, even though she wants me to pick her up. She's purring at the same time as all of this silliness. So I see Rings, and I'm Turgeon and Quindy. Hope you're all doing well. Had a fun weekend. I feel like I was going to say something, and now I can't remember. Because cats are very distracting. That's one of their best features. Worst features? I don't know. So today I want to mix it up, literally, and talk about color mixing. Rings had a mostly fun weekend. Mostly fun weekend. So I was thinking about it over the weekend, and I had decided I'd talk about desaturating colors, or how the ways to desaturate colors. And then I was in the shower this morning, and I'm like, no, I should probably, remember that the name of the show is Beyond the Kit, and we're going to start by talking about the colors in the kit. So to me, it looks like the sound and visuals are not synced. How does it look to you guys? I feel like I should try my little thing that I do. Maybe. Yes, desynced. Okay. Let's try this. Okay, does that look a bit better? Or did I make it worse? I think it's a little better. I'll just try a higher number. Now, let's see. Pretty close. Oh, that was worse? It's not getting closer? I don't know if I can put a minus in there. All right. Oh, I see what I did now. Okay, now let's try. Rings Raccoon doesn't think it's getting any better. The good news is I'll switch over to the other mode and you won't have to look at me. That's better. Okay, so let me add just a little to that number. Well, let's add a lot and see what happens. Okay, better? Looks a lot better to me. So, although now I have this cat, she's not going to want to go away. But let's see what I can do around the cat. I don't want my cat to get painted because I'm happy with the color that the cat is. You want to say hi to everybody? You want to just look weird? This kitty is, she's not an old kitty, but she's not a young kitty. And I think that she's decided her old lady form will be creepy. Sometimes she just goes down in the basement and stares at walls. Hi, Bob and Julie. Let's see, we went to see Dune. I'm not sure if I already told you guys that we went to see Dune. No, I can't remember. Which I really enjoyed it. There was a problem with the screen or the projector or something in our movie, so there was a small visual, well, a not entirely small visual artifact that was kind of distracting. But apart from that, I really enjoyed the film. All right, let's put my light on and switch views and see what I can do around the kitty. So I'm just using the colors out of here. I'm using the colors out of both sets, but I just thought I'd put the box up on the desk to be cute at first. So I have these colors, and I figured I'd begin by doing the swatches on the labels the way I've been doing. On some metallic side. Let's start on that side. So if you are not familiar with the concept of swatching, you're about to learn some things about it. But there was also, if you go back to the Reaper Miniatures YouTube channel and you look for old Beyond the Kits, there are two I think there are 2 episodes where we discuss swatching. And I do demonstrations and I show different kinds of paper and different methods you can use and what information to look out for. Do you want to go down? Nope? Okay. As usual, I shook all these paints a lot before the stream. Does that look a little too well lit? A little glaring out? It does on my screen, but my screen is not always the most accurate. So if that still looks too bright, let's zoom in, see what happens. She doesn't like that I'm not just sitting still and being a good perch. I know what you like. Yeah, I think it's still a bit bright. That's so weird because when I was testing earlier, it was too dark. All right, does that look good now? If it's still too bright, well, I'm not sure if I asked that after I am sure John commented. So I will keep checking the chat. If it's still too bright, I am starting with Dragon White, of course. So that's as white as it's going to get. I've just been using these old blister packs for this. So when you put the dot on the lid, you can do that without having to dispense any paint. But if you want to put paint on the label, obviously you have to put the paint onto something else. And just a piece of paper or whatever would be fine too, but I have plenty of these things, so I thought I'd use them. So what I like to do, and I will zoom in a little for this, I have the camera set up a little bit differently today because there's going to be like a piece of paper in it when we get to the mixing part. So I like to apply a pretty thick, I'm trying to get it fairly opaque, even if it's not opaque right out of the bottle. I want this to show the color as much as possible. This is not going to be that obvious on the white. I picked the wrong one to start with. Then I do the little stripe down, whatever those numbers are. And then I do this, which again, it's not going to say much. Let's switch to a different color, and then you will see why I'm doing that. So this is Brilliant Red. So I'm doing this part to show me what they call the mass tone. That's the color of the paint straight out of the bottle or tube. So this is useful information, but it's not the only piece of information. Then I do this to show me the opacity of it straight out of the bottle or tube. And naturally this is a red paint, so it's not super opaque, but it is also a bones paint, so it's semi-opaque. Then I want this bit to be somewhat transparent so I can see the undertone. So in this case, I didn't have to add anything to it. If I have to add something, I'm going to add brush on sealer. That's essentially the clear primer or the clear binder part of paint. So that will let me water it down like you would for a wash, but it will stick even if the label that you have is kind of slick. Anything acrylic paint would stick to, basically, this is going to stick to as well. I do have some other light colors though. So this is the bleached linen that's actually from, so I've comboed up the paints from the 2 sets. And I figured I could, I don't know, share some, learn to paint kit making trivia. So when Reaper asked me if I would do like an updated version of their Learn to Paint kits, I think this is the 3rd series. So the first series was like in little boxes. It was years and years ago. And that's actually what I started painting with. And I think it was sort of more by subject. So it was like armor and mail or something like that. But it wasn't Sir Forescale, but it was a guy like Sir Forescale, because I think there's a number of these Inurian guardsmen or Inurian something or others. They're named after one of the regions in the Reaper thematic world is Anhur. So he was pretty similar to that. He had the helm and everything, I think. Or did he have he might have had a little half helm so that you could paint just a little. But it was like that, and then there was a giant rat, and I still have never finished the giant rat. Someday, Someday I will finish the giant rat. So I'm just going to put a little of this in the corner because I'm working on the darkest colors from the two kits. And I'm pretty confident that they're going to need to be thinned down to look a little bit transparent on the label. So this one is Ebony Flesh, which is from Layer Up. And now I'm questioning whether... So if you can see where it looks just kind of milky and the color's not very intense, I think that even though I thought I set these up well before the show, I don't think it's fully stirred. So I had these in my closet for a little while. I'm just looking for a little piece of extra thing. So there's nothing stuck in the neck or the nipple. And what I have found is most successful for paints is the mixing machines are great and shaking a lot is great, but really stirring, if there's a problem, stirring is, you're going to feel it at the bottom. And I'm not feeling anything, but just in case. So I'm scraping the sides a little. And then if you do have like clumps, you can kind of bring them up higher and try to mix them in. And then if the problem is that the paint is too thick, you would have to add water, but I don't think that's a problem here. I think that it's just not, the pigment isn't dispersed well enough where it's a little bit separated. So you don't have to do this. It's not going to ruin the paint. If you did feel like you lost a lot of the binder, you could put in some of the brush on sealer and that would kind of make up for it. And now I'm going to very briefly mute so that I can shake this on my shaker. So I wanted to really try to get that well shaken. And now I think I can see a difference. And I suspect when I apply it that you will see a difference too. So it's a little less transparent and weak looking. Well, it's a lot less transparent and weak looking. So I have been going through my non-closet paints as well. My everyday paints, and it's been a little too long since I've done my paint maintenance. So you can see that this one is much more opaque than the red. You can barely see those numbers shining. I mean, you can see them a little, but you can't see it that well. So I'm going to have to add some of this clear binder stuff if I want to get the transparent view. And the reason I want to get the transparent view is to see what's called the undertone. And this is the one where if you do this with Nightmare Black, you will find out that Nightmare Black is really a really, really dark blue. And that's why it's useful to know the undertone of things, because if you were going to mix a wash and you wanted a black and you got something that was blue and it changed the colors of your thing, you might not be very happy. Rings Raccoon says, I just bought a shaker last week. Oh man, does it change the game? It's so amazing. I have no idea how I mix paint bottles with it. Yes, it absolutely does. But as I was saying, you can't rely exclusively on the mixer. Like, if you have paints that have started to separate or have been sitting a really long time or that have stuff stuck up here, and I've been putting a few aside to maybe show later, but let's see. The metallics are the worst for it, so this one's probably, yeah. So stuff gets stuck in the neck and up here, and you can either get rid of that if it's gone too goopy, or if it's just kind of sludgy, you can throw it back into the main mass, and then, but you have to mix with the stir stick. So this is what I get, because the label's funny, so I want to show you the label. So these are just like stir sticks, but these apparently are a party's best friend. So I don't even know how you have a party without an arrow looking swizzle stick, apparently. I thought I had one that I had not gunked up. So it's just that, and I reuse them for a while. I mean, the thicker it gets, the more paint you're losing, but it also becomes a little tougher to really get in that thick paint. So I'm down to my metallics. I started on the steel metallics, and that's where I'm experiencing losses. So all of the matte colors, I had some that were, you know, there was stuff stuck in the the neck. I had some that had gone sludgy or separated, but I was able to restore all of those. Where I ended up with the problem, and I mixed my two caps up here is what happened, is with the metallics. And that jives with my previous experience having done paint maintenance before. Metallics, I think because there's that flake as well as pigment, and the flake is probably heavier and larger than pigment, so it's easier for it to fall out of suspension. And I think that pretty much tracks across brands. I actually, I like Vallejo Air paints for, I had some, but I think I took them off my desk to clean up for today, for metallics. And some of them are, in pretty bad shape, and I think I'm just going to have to go down to Hobbytown and buy some more. So this actually is pure black. I mean, the undertone is going to be pure black, but it's useful to know that if I was looking at my alternate blacks, I could compare with this one. Valander says my Aoki steel may have completely gone kerploof. It's a shame since it's my favorite Reaper steel color. If you have like powder or clumps in the neck, like what I just showed, if you scrape that out, you may find that the stuff at the lower part of the bottle is still fine. Like you're gonna have to stir it a lot and stuff, but you may find that it's still like the correct consistency and the correct balance of the pigment and the metal flake and the binder. Because I did have some like that. That one was just so bad that I have to decide whether it's worth the effort if I'm just going to buy a new one. So this is a yellow, and even though it's a bones yellow, it's still going to be somewhat transparent. That is pigment. That's not Reaper or anyone else who makes transparent yellow paints ripping you off. It's a very vivid color. If you add white or you add gray, and that's one of the things I was originally going to talk about with mixing, but we'll do that in another show. You would make it less transparent, but it would also be less visible. It's possible you could find it. So Valander's saying that if his Aoki steel has gone kerploof, it was a special edition paint, so it's no longer available. They might release it again. There's sometimes places online, or you might find friends that would be willing to trade you. So it's not always a loss, but yes, it is. This is why I recommend paint maintenance, especially if you do have special edition paints or paints that were canceled. I recommend doing it, like, if you can, once a year. Every other year isn't bad. And I just, from mid-2018 to, mid this year, I kind of ended up, I just wasn't in a place where I was prepared to do it. I think I did paint maintenance on my secret stash, and then I just kind of, so there's how it starts. Sometimes you get some paint that clogs up there for some reason. I don't know why it doesn't pop down. So I sometimes try to check that this is clear before I recap the bottle, but it doesn't always work. But it's just the way dropper bottles work, I guess. Because, as I say, I have a few Vallejo paints, and they did the exact same thing, even though they're nipple and neck is a slightly different configuration. I might need just a little bit of the brush on sealer to thin that down. So, and if you want to do that, I have a page on my blog about paint maintenance. So it shows you some of the common issues, and takes you through my process for stirring them and stuff like that. I did manage to save a few of these too. I fixed some of mine, but I saved some of these for demonstration purposes. So that's what separation looks like, and it's easier to see it in this kind of container, but that happens in bottles too. And that is why, it's so sludgy at the bottom. That's why you have to stir, and you can't just rely, even if you have a mechanical shaker. Because so these paints, I had shaken that one that had a problem before we started, and I'd even checked some of them and stirred them. And these aren't as old as most of my paints. I think I got the sets for, I can't remember if it was Virtual Reprecon or RVE, but I did a paint along, learn to paint kit thing. So I got new sets so that they would look all pretty on camera and stuff. So these are fresher than the paints that I'm only just getting around to myself. But yeah, I don't know if Quindy can find that page. The link should be near the top of the homepage on my blog, because I think I think there's a paint section or a color section. I think how to take care of your paints is an important thing, because these I have paints from the first release still. There were a few colors that got canceled, and I can tell because of the way the labels have changed, or they still have the price stickers from the game store where I used to work when the NSP paints were released. Now these aren't, this one that I was showing you, this is not from the first release of the Pro Paints. That's from the re-release. So they're actually not as old as some of my super old MSP paints. And I have managed to keep them all these years because I will take the trouble of doing it. I've been doing it. You guys can't see my shelf. Someday I'm going to have to turn the face cam around so that you can see my paint shelf. If you watch Reaper Air, you've seen like 1/4 of the shelf. So I think my husband knows the number, and I probably don't remember it just because it's so scary. I think it's 800. It's between 700 and 800 is how many paints I have. And I've now gone through all of them except the like gold and bronze metallics and the darker iron and steel. And it's taken a minute, but the upside is I'm getting to do this on all the bottles at the same time. I know this is going to have a very positive benefit. I'm looking forward to reorganizing my shelf more accurately with the, from light to dark in each of the color families. And it should make it a lot quicker and easier to choose paints that are going to work well for what I'm trying to do on a specific project. Kuroniko says, I found some of my old Pro Paint recently, and I think that they're worshipping Nurgle now. Lots of blue and green marbling in the pots. I'm afraid to open them. You might be surprised if you open them and you get those stir sticks. You might be able to bring them back. You're probably going to have to add a ton of water. I prefer to add, like this little bottle that I have, I fill up with distilled water. Just because I know from the state of my shower door that there's a lot of minerals and stuff in our water here, and I figure why add that to paint if I don't have to, particularly when I'm adding something to the bottle. If I'm just mixing washes, I will sometimes use that stuff if I remember, and if I don't, I just use whatever's in my water cup, and it usually works out fine. Tasmania says, I still have some old Pro Paints myself, but I had put them in dropper bottles and I still use them. Yeah, I went through, I have like most of the complete set of P3 paints, but again, it's from when they first released, and there was some weird thing with one of the golds that the bottle, like, some people's bottles actually exploded, I think, but mine just went, it was curdled. It was, I don't know. It was weird. It wasn't even exactly like frozen paint. It's like, I have no idea what happened to this. And I contacted their customer service and was told that I would receive another bottle. And I'm still waiting. I did not continue to pursue that, but at the same time, I'm going to say I'm not very impressed with the customer service that said they were, going to address the problem and then did not. But anyway, I don't have a problem with the actual paint. And in fact, I was very impressed because I pretty much ignored it. So I tried using it, and it was different enough from the Reaper paints that I'm used to, that it annoyed me. And then I found what worked is at least to try to transition, was if I used a mix. Like I use those paints, but then I use Reaper paints to mix my shades and highlights and stuff. And I painted a couple of things, and then I just was not highly motivated to continue using them. So I had them in this box, and it's been in my paint room, like at the bottom of a shelf or under my desk or whatever. So when I went to do the maintenance on them, I'm like, oh gosh, these things are going to be terrible because I haven't looked at them in several maintenance cycles. So they're not just late the way most of my paints are late. They're like never really been addressed. And I was super impressed. They were in fine shape. They needed to be stirred and stuff, but I think I only lost one metallic. No, I don't think I lost any paints. But what I did remember is how much I hate those flip top things. Like I have some pain in my hands and stuff, and it was really painful by the end of working on those to open them up and stuff. Especially one that the little tab had broken off. That was, which I think was black, so I'm sure I guess I don't use black that much, but so I was strongly thinking about putting them in dropper bottles, like that it would be worth the annoyance, because I also have the new Nocturna paints that I haven't really used yet, and they're in that exact same kind of container. And I feel like it would be worth it to not have them in that same kind of container. I think I'd have to solve the labeling problem though, because what I did with some other paints, so these are Liquitex things, and they just come in a bigger bottle than I want to have on my desk. So I transferred them over here, and I just wrote all the stuff on them with Sharpie, and then I use these little labels that don't stick very well in the end to do my what I'm doing now, the swatches. And it's not that great a system. So I know sometimes people are able to peel labels off of their old paints and apply them to the bottles and stuff, but I haven't decided how I would address the labeling problem, as well as I've been messing with paints for a while, so I think I'd probably take a break from that. As much as I would like to play with those paints, I think I'd probably just have to live with the opening them sucks. Karinico says that sounds like Privateer Press customer service. Yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't tried it much, but it does not seem to meet the standards that I am accustomed to from Reaper. I will say that. Rings Raccoon says flip top jars are the reason I will not use GW paints. Well, that and Reaper paints are just better. Yes, I have to admit that while I don't enjoy the experience of using the pot that Privateer Press, and then I think it's Nocturna, has, it at least works. Like I said, those paints are 15 or I don't know how many years old, and they're fine. So the pot worked even if I don't enjoy opening it, where I cannot say that about any GW paints that I have bought, because I have bought GW paints, and yet do I have any now? No, I do not, because the paint dries out, and I refuse to support the nonsense of making people rebuy paint because your paint pots are crap. Because they used to have good pots. Like, I hear people talking about them, and I have this old style one from, like, this store has not been in existence in our town for a long time. I can't open this. I have it on my desk because I keep meaning to ask my husband to see if he can open it. But this is back when they even called it Citadel Color and stuff. And I bet it's fine. Like, I can hear it in there. It seems fine. But those flip top things, I haven't bought paint since they changed their formula, because I had paints, and I do this. Like, I do this normally every couple of years, and they couldn't make it between every couple of years of a maintenance cycle. And I'm like, nope, that is insane. I am not rewarding that madness. Botroidoides01, I am so sorry that I'm mangling your name, is asking, how am I diluting the paint to apply it on the label to assess its diluted properties? It looks like you are moving the brush off screen briefly and then applying onto the barcode. Am I dipping the tip into water? No, I'm not using water. Usually what I'm doing is just wiping off the excess. If it's a slightly transparent paint, I'm just wiping the excess off on this paper towel. If it's not a transparent paint, I've got a little bit in the corner here of brush on sealer, which is pretty much the same thing as binder, the clear part of paint, the acrylic part that makes it acrylic paint. If I use water, it might not adhere to the label. So I want it to be pure paint, whether it's pure out of the bottle or I've made it more transparent by adding brush-on sealer. And even the Privateer press labels were pretty, like they were slick like magazine paper or something. And with that method, it stuck fine. Now, I haven't gone and tried to like, vigorously rub the paint off, but it seemed fine. So here, I'll make sure I'm on screen this time. So all I'm doing is just get, because this I'm really clumping it on. Oh, well, I still needed to do the full strength. So this swipe, I'm trying to, yeah, that is metallic. Is that the same metallic? Sorry, I got lost in what I was doing. You know what? I'm going to dispense more of this paint and make sure that I'm doing the right thing. All right, there we go. And there I was getting unintended dilution because as anyone who's been watching before knows, I tend to get a big drop of water stuck on the ferrule. And at the worst time, it'll slide down and go in the paint. But to do this part, I want it to be pretty much full strength because this is my opacity test. And this is clearly not a super opaque paint. So in fact, for this one, even to do the test of the undertone, I have to get a little extra. And I did find that with some other colors too, like some of the yellows or just anything that's fairly transparent. Now, one mistake I made is that I still have some HD paints, and I went ahead and I did this on the yellow label. And last night when I was trying to pick out paints for how I was originally going to do this show, I was looking at blue, and of course, a lot of the paints, especially where I do the thin down part, it's looking green because the yellow label plus the blue paint makes some shade of green. So the color alteration is enough doing it on the yellow labels that I think I need to get those little stickers I have and put them on the label so that, like these stickers I used, where did it go? Like these little stickers, and put that over the yellow. And for this, for the opacity, I mean, you can kind of, yeah, oh, it shows up. That's interesting. In person, that black line is not nearly as dramatic as it looks like on the screen. So this is a somewhat transparent color, but it looks way more transparent on the screen. That's very interesting. Now I'm just going to have to be careful to not put my thumb in the swatches that are still drying. Which even when I'm not doing the show, I have done. You can see it's got kind of like almost a little bit of a pewter undertone. That's kind of interesting. And then this is the bronze, which is a very nice color. I think that section is dry enough now. I like Dragon Gold a lot too. I really like the Bones Metallics. They're a little shinier. It's a different formulation of stuff. It wasn't available when the original MSP metallics were formulated. It was something and found about later. I mean, they might have developed it later. All right, so that was the swatching, but now I want to get to the mixing. Just clear out my desk a little bit. And I do have a couple miniatures set to the side in case for some reason we end up wanting to test any of the mixed colors. But, so part of why I wanted to do this is, I know this isn't going to be true of everyone, but for me, when I first started painting, I was not that comfortable with color, and I was not that comfortable with color mixing. I studied it a lot more. I'm a lot more comfortable about it now. I'm not intuitive, so there are people who are very intuitive about color. I think Anna is one of those people, if you watch her show. The Weeper Toolbox. I think it's 11:30 Reaper time every day. So I had one of these even early on, and I do recommend that you get one of these. This smaller size is, I mean, if you pay more than $7, if you live in the U.S., I would be very surprised. But they pack a lot of information on here. Probably won't talk about all of it today, but I may talk about some of it. And then before I started doing the show, I got this big giant one, and it now seems to me like this is probably too giant. I thought it'd be easier to read or something. It's nice in that it's a little bit plasticized, so it's not going to get messed up as easily. And the colors may be a little bit more vivid. Like, let's compare the two greens. Yeah, I think the colors are a little bit more vivid because of the type of material they've used. But it's not like a significant difference. So anyway, I had one of these, but one of my problems was, a lot of times I'm not using paint that are these, intense colors, like super saturated colors. Or if I am, I maybe don't want to be using super saturated colors. I would like to desaturate them so that they can look more like, old, worn out adventurers or stuff like that. Peasants. And you want, this color green doesn't look very convincing for grass. You would want something more like this. But what you can see here is that they have additional colors under each of the main colors. So this is kind of like the big primary color. Don't look on that side, look on this side. The primaries are, red, blue, yellow, and there's an alternate system for that. But here, I'll just switch it so that we have the primaries are showing here. And then you have the secondaries, and then these are the tertiaries, but kind of like the purest, most saturated colors, the kids' crayon type colors are around the edges. But if you look down in each section, there are different versions of those colors. And what those actually are, they do explain it on here in very small writing. So I will zoom in. And so if you go on my website, I have something called the Catalog of Color or the Commending of Color or something like that. And it takes you through all of these color terms and a lot more, and tries to, make color seem a lot less intimidating. Because it is one of those, the color theory and the terms and all of that, those are very accessible to those of us who are more left-brain people. This is one of those things that you can study successfully. And if you are uncomfortable with it, I recommend doing that, because I think that is how I became comfortable with it, is I just kept reading the same definitions over and over again, and some of it finally stuck. So I kind of wanted to talk about color mixing now and then for people like me. And I decided to start with the Learn to Paint Kit colors. I mean, I know they sell a lot of them, because Anatomy of Color, that is correct. Thank you, Quinty. I know they sell a lot of the Learn to Paint kits, particularly the first one. So they were colors that I figure a lot of people have, whether you bought them to actually do the painting exercises in them, or you just bought them to get a few extra supplies, because it's kind of discounted over. If you bought those paints and those brushes and those figures individually, you would pay more than you would pay if you bought the Learn to Paint kit, I believe. So I know there are people who just buy them for the stuff, that not everyone cares about the instructions and whatnot. But I know there are a lot of people who have done the instructions too. So I thought I would start with those colors on the assumption that a lot of people who have Reaper paints are going to have most of those colors, if not all of them. And it's not obvious, I guess, in some ways, but I sort of designed the two kits to mesh together. So in the first kit, there's no red, there's no skin tone, and there's no orange even. So there's yellow, blue, green, a couple of different browns, and some grays and metallics. Because I picked the colors. I was going to tell you trivia of the kits too, that's true. And I don't have all the figures, but I have some of the figures here, so I'll just bring these out, and you can see this is the orc in the original Bones, and they've now switched all the kit figures over to the Bones USA, and the amount of detail, if I zoom in on his little face. Wow, Trash, that's impressive. 28 months of subscription. So I think if you look at his face, I mean, the color differential isn't going to help. But let's look here. So there's a couple of places, I haven't put my specs on, so I'm doing the old look over my glasses move. There's a couple places on the original where, the fur detail wasn't quite as crisp or whatever, and it's really crisp now on the new Bones USA version. So anyway, they gave me pretty free reign. There were some requests about, include paints from this line and that line and stuff like that. But what I did was and we wanted to do it more as skills instead of the original sets. So I was saying that the first sets that they had, they kind of did it by subject. So it was like armor and leather, I think was the first one. And then the next one was skin and cloth. And it was kind of similar in that they were still talking about, dry brushing and washing more in the first one. And then they introduced layering in the cloth and skin one. But we decided we wanted to focus more on skill sets instead of specific effects or textures, at least for the first few. Like, I think I do want to go on, and I've been saying I'm going to do one on hair for like ever, but I do mean it. So I kind of picked out a couple figures, and my aim was, so this one is actually from the first Learn to Paint kit, and these two are from the second. I think I have all the figures here somewhere. But anyway, my goal was to get something very simple. Hi, Nomad Zeke. So I'm doing some paint mixing today, but I'm also kind of doing a little bit of a history story on the Learn to Paint kits. And to me, I think what is very helpful for people, especially for their first couple of figures, are for the figures to be as simple as possible. Like that little skeleton, that might almost seem too simple to someone if you've been painting for a while, but you can, you paint the bones, you paint the wood and the leather on the quiver the same color. You add a little bit of blue on top of the arrows and you paint the grass, and it's done. And getting someone through all of that quickly to done, I mean, that gives them a nice sense of accomplishment, and it doesn't overwhelm them with too much happening at the same time. So I was trying to choose figures. Now, at that time, the Bones line was very small. This was before the first Bones Kickstarter even. So I know there were like 36 figures, something like that. And then I think I had a little more of a selection for the second one, but I'm not 100% sure. So I did test paints for all of them using the colors I selected, and I think I ended up swapping out one or two colors as I was doing those test paints, and I meant to go get the test paint figures. And then I submitted the pictures of those and the list of here's the colors I want to do, here's the figures I want to do, here's the brushes I want to do to Reaper, so that they could double check that they were okay with all of that. And then I painted the figures kind of for real and for Reaper, where I went through and I took the step-by-step pictures and then any supplemental pictures that were needed for the books. And this is actually, like, the first one was more of like a folded poster size thing, and it was glossy paper. So this is like the new version. But I wrote all these things down, and then I did blind testing. So my other hobby is board games, and board game developers will talk about this thing where you do blind play testing. And what that is you give the box of stuff and your rules, your rule paper like this, to a table full of people, and they have to figure out how to play from that. You're not teaching them the game. They have to be able to do it without having the person who made the game up or anyone else who knows the rules there to tell them the rules. And I wanted the Learn to Paint kits to work the same way. So I printed out, much less nicely formatted versions of my instructions, and I had friends, some of whom had never painted before, sit down, and I sat with them and I talked to them, but I wouldn't answer any questions or say anything about painting. I just would be like, how are your kids, whatever, to see if they could follow the instructions or if they had any problem areas where they're like, I just don't understand what's happening here. And I did that with both kits, and I think that was an important thing to help me identify. There were some formatting things they suggested, stuff like that as well. So then when it was time to make the second kit, I was conscious of the fact that there were colors I had not included in the first kit. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to treat this as if I'm making the second half of what would be one mega kit. So in terms of skills, you're not going to have repeats on skills. You're not going to have repeats on tools. Like, so the brush sizes and shapes are all different between them. And then you're not going to have repeats on the paint other than, and it's not a repeat, but I had to put a dark color in each for mixing shades and washes. So one of them has, pure black, and one of them has the ebony flesh. And then the same thing with white. One of them has a true white, and then one of them has slightly off white, which is a useful color to have. All of these are useful colors to have. So I think it still fell in my parameters, particularly since this is a skin color. Still fell in my parameters of not really duplicating stuff. So in my mind, it is meant to be one big mega kit. If you really want all the stuff you need to get started painting. But somehow I was too subtle about that. And it's interesting. Ron told me recently that, or was it Ron? In general, when they're at cons, and if Reaper John is here, maybe he confirmed this, people feel intimidated by the layer up kit, even though we've been very careful not to say this is the beginner one and this is the advanced one and this is kit 1 and this is kit 2. I started painting with layering. I don't think it's an inaccessible technique. I think it is available for beginners. I think I wrote it in a way that's accessible to beginners. The only time I make a distinction is if you are buying something for children or someone who's very impatient. The instructions are shorter on the core skills. So it's a little shorter and simpler. There's no like preamble explanation. So I recommend that kit if that's a factor in the person you're buying it for. But other than that, if you could afford it, I would tell people to buy both of them, and then you're well set up with paints and everything else. And these are the paints we're going to look at. I just put them slightly out of frame. But, so I tell you how to mix things in there, but now you're on your own, and you want to mix other stuff. How do you do it? So I'm actually going to show you some stuff from... So I didn't do this when I made the Learn to Paint kits. I mean, I did mix this to figure out what I wanted to paint, but it was like I had the figures, I had the colors, I knew what I wanted to paint. So this was a color test for the Learn to Paint Krampus last December. I don't know if they're going to do that again. Whether they do or not, I think I'm going to do an episode on the show where I take you through the Learn to Paint Krampus stuff from last year. It's just 4 colors of paint. Ignore these pink things. I was testing something else on spare paper. But the rest of this is just me testing various color mixes, which you can see I never got to use these pretty greens in Krampus because it's wintry and stuff. But that paint set makes nice pretty greens too. And then after that, and this is probably just more, just mixing Krampus stuff to see, or this might have been from the Bones Learn to Paint kit. So I had to pick 12 colors for the Bones Learn to Paint kit, and that was intended to be a more comprehensive set of colors where I was kind of starting. That time I started with the colors because somebody else, I didn't have any input into the miniatures other than there was one that I said, I think that's way too complex to put in a Learn to Paint kit. And then there was another one, I'm not sure they picked all of them. And I said, well, can you put in this one? Because I think it'll be really good for the demonstration. It was like the equivalent of the skeleton. It's a nice, quick, simple, you're going to be done and get that sense of accomplishment quickly. So what I started with was, and I knew, so obviously this one was all Bones colors. So it narrowed down the paint selections a lot. But I started with the idea of the primaries. The red, blue, yellow, which you can't actually mix all colors from those, and that's a story for another day. But it seemed like a good thing to have in the kit because this is not a Blick sketch pad. This is Canson XL watercolor, which I like doing these swatches. I don't like it for watercolor; it sucks. Watercolor, but it's nice thick paper for working with fluid acrylics on. And so what I actually have, so today's paper, I cut them up because I realized that this size doesn't fit under the camera very well if I want to go down Like, I think this is the highest level of zoom out if I want to zoom in at all, so you can see the mixing part a little more. So what I got is, this is a pad. It's the same paper. It's just a pad, so I can tear off sheets and cut them up pretty easily. The Blick paper is probably fine. I just happen to have these, and they're often on sale at like Michael's or Joann's with the coupon. So I will do that. So my first step for the Bones Learn to Paint kit was to kind of narrow down, you know, which red did I want, which blue did I want, which yellow did I want. And I did that by doing some mixes, because they won't all mix the same. Then I had to pick which purple I wanted. And which green I wanted. So these were all like the initial tests of narrowing down the colors. And I think I initially picked a different red, but then that color was also in Anne's favorite set. And Ron thought it'd be better if there weren't any duplicate paints in the Kickstarter, so that if people were backing for all the paint, they wouldn't get 2 bottles of the same one. And that made sense, so I swapped out my red. But then the rest of this was me when I'm painting the miniatures, because there were 12. I mean, that was, 3 is one thing, 12 is another thing. So I had to do various mixes, and then also do mixes to figure out the shade and highlight colors for some of them. And I thought it was an interesting experience, and that would be kind of a fun thing to do on stream a little bit. So that's been way too much preamble today. I'm sorry about that. But I didn't know some of you would enjoy the history of the Learn to Paint kits. I didn't talk about the middle Learn to Paint kits. So the first one I did, that was the armor and leather, I think that was written by someone other than Anne. But then she had written the skin and cloth one that I did. And there were I think they went up to 8 or something. There was non-metallic metal. I had them all. I didn't do the pieces in all of them, but I did have all the kits. I did try to do the non-metallic metal, and I got very frustrated. I had to figure out another way to do it, and now I do it more like Anne does it in the kit. But anyway, that's a different story. Ring says, we are sponges, we absorb and enjoy everything. Well, I'm glad that you do, Rings. I don't know if that's true for everyone. So I don't know why I was afraid of color mixing in the beginning. So for me, it wasn't the idea of wasting paint, which I know is going to be a stickler for some people. They're gonna feel like it's fine that I put this paint out, that Reaper probably gives me extra paint if I need it, and Reaper does give me extra paint if I need it. But they need to, carefully marshal their supplies. And I can't remember, one of you who watches Anne Show more regularly probably knows the answer, but it's somewhere between 300 and 400 drops of paint are in here. So let's say it's 350, and I use 35 drops of paint doing color tests to learn more about color. So I've used up 10% of my bottle in paint, but I've gained a lot of knowledge. I think that's worth it. Another thing you can do is, if you have paint left over on your palette after you're painting something, play around with those colors and mix things. You might have to get a couple other colors and bring them in, but you're bound to learn something. All right, so we have kind of an orange, but let's see what orange we make when we'll get the closest to the primaries out of the kit are red, yellow, and blue. In this case, that's dragon, blue, candlelight yellow. So those are both from the first kit, and then brilliant red is from Layer Up. So what happens if we just mess around with some of the primaries? Let's zoom in more. And I'll just have to move the paper around some. Hello, would you like to focus? Also, if you do this on a wet palette instead of paper, it will use less paint. But it will also beat up and stuff, so it wouldn't look as nice on. Casmania confirms that Anne always quotes 400 drops. So if you think about it, okay, I didn't parcel it out. Well, it's yellow we're going to use the most of, I bet. So let's add yellow by drops until we get about that size. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It was 3. I actually went too far. So these are like 2 to 3 drops. That's not an insanely wasteful amount of paint. It's going to feel like it sometimes, but it's not an insanely wasteful amount of paint. And the more you understand the specific like color in general and the specific colors that you're using, the more that's going to help you. So the general rule of thumb when you're mixing with a color that is lighter or weaker is get some of that one and then add a little bit of the color of a stronger color to it. So I'm not going to add like a whole drop of this red. I'm going to add a little bit of this red and see what kind of orange we get. Now this will be the other thing is maybe you prefer to have recipes so that you know. And that's not a bad orange. I mean, that's a pretty good orange. It may be that I'm going to have to not keep the paint on the paper because we're going to have that problem. So you can also try doing it the other way if you want to know your drops. So I'm going to guess three drops of that yellow and 1 drop of the red, and let's see what happens. And if you need to do this while you're first learning, that's okay. You are going to go through more paint than if you're more comfortable just, well, I'll take a bunch of yellow and add a little drop of red. But you're still going to learn. So if you're not in a position where you have to scrimp and save, go ahead and do it by the drops. And that's interesting. They're almost the same. I would say this is actually closer to the, in between orange color that I would look for between those two. And I could write down, I could just write under it 3 white to 1 red, or put the numbers in or something. So then I can use this as a reference later once these dry, like I had these. So I know that this one is 1 to 1 to 1, the white with the brown and the green that I had in the Learn to Paint for Bones 5. I could do this in a slightly more organized way if I wanted to be able to use that as a reference. Okay, so that was the orange. Now let's find out about the purple. There's a little bit of yellow on this side of the drop, and I don't want that. So let's go ahead and try just a half and half. Since these are both kind of strong colors. This blue doesn't want to come up for some reason. I think there's just some air stuck in it or something. My guess is we're not going to get a very attractive purple. So if you were looking for, a really nice regal purple, that's probably not it. This is a totally usable color. This is more of a maroon or a wine. I would use this color. But you might have to buy a purple. Even if I had different blues, I still might not mix a great purple. So if you need like an exact color, let me rewind because I don't think I'm explaining this very well. So when you're mixing colors, you can kind of approach it 2 ways. One is I know that I want to paint a color like this, and I try to mix colors until I match it as exactly as possible. So you might have a photo reference, or you might have a miniature that someone else painted that you loved how it looked, and you're trying to match the colors. That is a challenging thing to do. It's an excellent exercise. You will learn a lot about color doing it. But if you've tried to do that and failed and you're super frustrated, that's not the only way to color mix. Another way to do it is to think about, what am I doing? So that is how I was color mixing for the Bones to Paint Learn to 5, or Bones 5 Learn to Paint kit. So these colors were for the noblewoman. I'm like, okay, I want nice pastel, pretty colors that a rich woman might buy. So did I care what exact shade of pink I got? No. Did it look like a nice pink that a rich person might buy? Yeah, I'm good. So you don't have to approach it as, I have to match this exact skin tone or whatever kind of thing. And in fact, let's add a little white to this, because that'll be the other thing. If you have darker colors, adding a little white to them will change how they look. And then if you have lighter colors, sometimes adding some black or dark brown or something will give you more options too. So I very much recommend that, to try to shift your color mixing when you're using colors away from, like, not to never try to match a specific color. Maybe you have an army or whatever, and the paint went out of availability and you're trying to match it. That's fine. But just to think about it from the other point of view of making interesting colors that you can use with your colors instead of trying to make a particular color. So it's like, you want something pinky or purpley. You might not get an exact tone of purple that you're thinking of. Rings has pointed out that purple is one of the hardest colors to match, and this is true. This is like a kind of a scarlet red, and you want a red that's a little more like you want a red that's pinker, basically. In fact, if you have magenta and blue, you're going to get a better purple. But it's also easier to just buy purple, and then you have purple. And purple is nice to have because you can mix it with other things. So that is, if you have like all of the Learn to Paint colors, that is one color that is still missing. I don't consider orange a big lack. I just showed you that it's really easy to mix orange. And this yellow is even closer to orange. So you can get deep oranges with that. But the purple is not in here, so that is always one of the colors that if people are like, well, what extra colors would I need? It's like, go get purple, because purple is super useful. I should have put it in there, but I didn't. If I make another Learn to Paint kit, I'll definitely have to put it in there. So that is the other thing, is that, in fact, let's make the exact same mix. So this was 3 drops of yellow to 1 drop of the red. So this is the other yellow. This is a warmer yellow that's in Layer Up. And let's find out how that differs from the mix with the cooler red, or just kind of primary red, really, Candlelight Yellow. And then this is a fairly primary red in terms of what the color wheel says. But as we just discussed with purple, the primaries aren't always going to act like you think they're going to act. So interestingly, the red is more powerful on this color. Like, this is a weaker yellow than this one. And I wouldn't have thought that, since this is super transparent. I mean, they're both pretty transparent, but I would have expected Candlelight Yellow or Marigold Yellow to be the more powerful of these two, and it wasn't. So in this particular case, I'll add another drop. And this goes back to what we talked about with washes, where I can't tell you that to make a good wash, you're always going to add 4 drops of water to a drop of paint. So different paints have different strengths and intensities. So these two colors, even though they're both yellow and they're both pretty transparent, I'm having to mix different proportions of them with the red to get equivalent value colors. And I think that's equivalent value. I'm not 100% sure. The way I could check would be to, if I were you could get your phone. And I think now you have to take a picture on Apple phones at least, and then you switch it to black and white. But we have this fancy camera, so we can do it a different way. Eventually, I will get to black and white. And this is it is a little bit darker. So I haven't quite mixed the equivalent orange. So now we're up to 6 drops of the Marigold Yellow to 1 drop of red. And now if you look at those 2 pools, that's even still a smidge darker, I think, but we'll call it equivalent, and I will go back to normal color view. So you get 2 different oranges using the same red. And that's one of the things that can be fun about color mixing. And why you might need to stop and do this when you're trying to figure out shade or wash colors or whatever for your things. So I do have another blue. It's a very faded blue, so I don't think this is really going to make a purple, but let's find out what it does. Rings Raccoon says that's a neat way to do it. I've never thought of that. I've eyeballed the values by using a value chart. Yes, so for anyone who might not know what a value chart is, this is a very simple one. This is white. You can't hardly see it because It's very similar to the color of paper, so, and that's black, and then those are grays in between. But if you go back to my little color wheel, or my big color wheel, they have a built-in one here. So they, it's divided in half for some reason, but they're using the full scale from value 1 to value 10. Some people differ on whether 1 is white or 10 is white, but the basic concept is still there. And they have it. I mean, I guess if we go, I know I'm going to make you dizzy with this. I wish there were a way that I could just switch between those two modes, because I don't think I need any, I don't know what else is happening there, but I don't think I need any of that stuff. So if we look at yellow, yellow is a really light color. It's pretty much the second lightest, or the second darkest one next to white, value 9 on this value scale. And then they start getting, darker from there. Like the green is even, that's value 6. The green's pretty much value 5. And then blue somewhere between 5 and 4. And then red is going to surprise you, because you're going to think red must be a lighter color than it is. But red is a much darker color than you think it is. So it's in between 2 and 3, I think. So it's so much closer to black. You probably would have thought it was more like over here. But it's a much darker color than we think it is. Which it's useful to know a little bit about this, or to look at your colors in black and white now and then, because value is a very important form of contrast. And you might have, you're painting the different sections of your figure, different colors. So if I gave him like dark green skin and then made his, well, he doesn't have a lot of armor, so he's not the best one. All right, let's say I gave this guy dark red skin because he's really a Martian pirate. I don't know. And then I made his clothes like black or dark. The skin wouldn't stand out very well from the clothes, or as well from the clothes, because it would be more similar in value than you think it is. And I do that all the time. That is the hardest part of color to me, is learning to identify the values well. Purple is often a little bit darker than you think it is. So yellow is almost always light, or it starts turning into brown really. But orange and red can be a little darker than you think they are. They're very intense colors, so we tend to think of them, we associate them with things like fire. Our brains think of them as being light or lighter than they are. So this is what we call a desaturated color. So if you compare this one and this one, this is a more intense blue. This is more blue. It's closer to this blue that they printed on the color wheel. Actually, it's surprisingly close to the blue that they printed on the color wheel. And this is not. This doesn't match any of these outer rim colors. So that kind of, I'm on my wrong side here. This one looks more similar to these colors. And in fact, I think it's not quite a blue-green or blue-violet. So it's still a blue, but it's less saturated. Now, how did Anne do that? I probably can't, I'm not going to be able to make this exact color, but I can certainly make some desaturated blues. Because let's say you didn't have layer up. You only have this blue, but you want to paint the army uniforms for your town guard, in a more of a desaturated color like this. Could I make this exact color? Probably not. But can I desaturate this? Yes. There are multiple ways to do it. So I will put out multiple bits of paint. So if you add white, that desaturates a color. If you add black, that desaturates a color. If you add white and black together, they make gray, and that desaturates a color. So these are going to be the ways that don't alter the color much. So you're not mixing in another color, because you can desaturate a color by adding brown, but I'm adding a bunch of other colors there. You can desaturate a color by adding its color complement, but then I'll be adding a bunch of colors. That's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just something to be aware of. And this is what this is telling you about. So when we see, they're talking about shade, tone, and tint. So tint is they took this color and they added white. Tone is they took this color and they added gray. Shade is they took this color and they added black. Now, obviously, just like there's that value scale there, you could add more white or black and make that like a super light blue or a super dark blue. But this is just like a basic interpretation of what happens. So let's repeat that experiment. I didn't make my pools very equal, but let's repeat that experiment with our own paints. So I think this is pretty much the middle gray, and this is a neutral gray. That's why I grabbed this one so the actual gray in the kit is Mountain Stone. And in fact, let's add a fourth thing for that. And if you were here, I think last week, I was using Mountain Stone, and I like Mountain Stone because it's more of a natural gray. So if you compare these two, even though this is probably a little darker in value, but they're pretty similar. And we can compare to the darker value neutral gray. I'm giving the focus a hard time today, apparently. So this one almost looks like it has some blue in it if you're looking at it on screen, but it's actually neutral, and it's because this one has some brown, or it's probably a little bit of red, a little bit of orange, something like that. It's warmer. It's not a pure neutral gray. When I'm using grays, in terms of I'm using grays, I would rather have a pure neutral, but for mixing, I would rather not use a pure neutral, but for mixing, you're going to get more consistent results if you use the true neutral. But we're going to compare. It might not be that different in the end. We'll find out. This is why we're doing this. So I'm telling you much color theory stuff. I haven't tested all this stuff necessarily. Some of it's just from books. Now I'm here testing it. And I recommend that you do the same thing. So all right, we'll do the white first. And this should rather unshockingly just make a paler version of blue. It's going to be like, it's not quite a baby blue, I wouldn't say. But it's definitely lighter. There's the original blue if you want to compare. And I just did 1-to-1, and it's probably going to end up being a pretty dark, the one mixed with black, because pure black is a pretty powerful color. So it overpowers the blue. Now it is different. It's not a true black. Let's thin it out. I was just getting rid of some of the excess there. But if I thin it out, you can see it's not a pure black. There's that little tinge of blue. But if I were trying to make a dark blue, I would have to add more blue to that. But now let's see what happens with the grays. So the grays are, roughly the same value as the blue. So I'm not trying to shift it darker or lighter. I'm just trying to shift it duller. So I'm trying to make it more like this. And take some of the blue out, in essence. Make it faded. So saturated is kind of like, so there's the value scale, measures how light or dark something is. If you think of saturation as being on a scale, it's from like super vivid to gray. So it'd be like cherry red, then brick red, and then, dark gray would be a short value or short saturation scale for red. So you can see that it definitely did have an impact to use those two different grays. This is a little cleaner. This might be nice. Maybe you like this, and that's more like your faded uniform that you're thinking of. But it has some other colors introduced, so it has a little bit of a different effect. And let's add just a little bit of white, because it definitely is darker than the mix with the other gray. So I'm trying to get where these two values are more similar, this one and this one. And this becomes almost a blue-gray, I think, because now I've dulled it down by adding the gray that had a little brown in it. So the gray already had white and black, and now I've added more white. You can definitely see that there's less blue than if I just mix the blue with neutral gray. And honestly, this probably has white in it. If I had to guess, my guess would be that Reaper, not that one. I put them somewhere else. Okay, this is a test version of the phthalo blue that they gave out at one of the cons. I'm pretty sure that Reaper's main blue that they used to mix colors with is phthalo. So, and you can see that it's a little darker than that. So, and would have had to add at least white to this to make it a bit lighter of a color. And this is why Anne will say, if you're someone who already knows about color, well, if you're someone who already knows about color, you probably turned me off a long time ago because I'm talking about really basic stuff. But if you're someone who knows about color and you want to, have a pure mixing set or whatever, that's the Reaper Clears. Which I was going to use for my original color plan, and so now they're in another part of my room because I'm silly. So I have some that we can't. I'm very sad we can't get this one anymore. Although I think that's the same. They did clear green as a special color as well for one of the. But this is what I was talking about, having the first releases. So this is what the labels used to look like, and these are some old paints that I have managed to maintain over the years because I do take that time to go back through them. And hi, Miniatures Den, and many raiders. Wow, thank you for joining us. I'm talking about color mixing. I'm specifically using the colors from the Reaper Learn to Paint kit, but I'm talking about general color mixing principles. So this was an example here of, I took this blue, I mixed it with white, which they call tint. I mixed it with gray. They call that a tone. So this was a pure neutral gray. This was a gray that has clearly has other stuff in it. It's a warm gray, so it has to have a little bit of brown or orange or red or something. And it does make a difference when you mix the two colors together. And then this was mixing 1 drop of that blue with the black, which the pure black is such a powerful color that it kind of just looks like black. It isn't. I added a little bit of water so that we could see that is slightly different than a black. But let's try it with 3 drops of blue to 1 drop of black instead of just the 1 to 1. That was probably a little more than 1 drop, but and even that, wow, look how powerful pure black is, because at that ratio, so that is lighter than the previous one, and if I add water, it's going to look a little different. The previous one, there's a little more hint of blue, but we're going to have to add a lot more blue. And this is why for the people who weren't here before, my suggestion when you're doing this on your own and you're just trying to mix a shadow color for that blue, take a little bit of black. Oh, wait, I don't have a little black out. And add it into the blue instead of adding blue into the black or trying to do, 1-to-1 ratios. So there's a darker blue. And again, it made it duller. It made it duller in a slightly different way than either the grays did, because the gray is making it duller with both white and black. So it's a little more saturated of a color still, because it's just the black. Just like the one with just the white is a little more saturated of a color. So the more different colors you add in when you do mixes, the less pure, the less saturated your color is going to look. So that's exactly what happened here, because with the brown gray, we added white, we added black, we added at least one other unknown color that made that makes this a warm gray to that blue. So there's at least 4 colors there, where there's only two colors there. Assuming, this isn't, like I said, this probably isn't pure pigment. I suspect there's already white in there, but it shouldn't be too far off, because it's not a wildly different blue like this one. So this one definitely has white and probably black added, if not a little bit of purple or something. Color mixing, when you're doing like a giant vat of it, can be a whole other science. So that's what they're telling you on the color wheel. And that's why if you're having trouble, it's like, well, this color isn't on my color wheel. How am I supposed to make color schemes and stuff? Like, how am I supposed to figure out which of these, what's the complementary color of this? What triad would it be in? And in a triad, I don't mean like Reaper triads where we're talking about the shade, highlight, and middle color, but a triadic color scheme is you have 3 colors. So like red, blue, and yellow. And that would be, you'll see a lot of like a military character type where the uniform's mostly blue. There'll be a few red accents, or maybe the guy's hair is red, and then you'll have like gold or gold NMM on the trim or whatever. So what color is this? I can, if I look at these, I can see, oh, this is really a variation of orange. Yeah, it doesn't quite have that red in it. It doesn't quite have that little greeny color that the yellow orange has when you add stuff to it. This is the closest color. So in terms of figuring out color schemes, now I have that tool. Let's see. Elijah 7 says, ooh, subtractive color mixing. I remember this. Nice to see you explaining this. Many non-artists don't know it. Yeah, and I think this is something that's very accessible to people who are non-artists. A lot of miniature painters are kind of what I think of as left-brain people, computer programmers, engineers, stuff like that. They're the people who want to know, okay, how many drops of water do I add to make a wash? And then they're kind of sad when my answer, at least, is it depends. And I think anyone who tells you a definitive answer is lying to you, because as we proved with the, you had to add a whole bunch of black or a whole bunch of blue to counteract that black. I only had to add a little white. So some colors are more powerful than others. And not color, I mean paints. So you might have, this blue is very powerful. You might have another blue, and one I can think of from the Reaper line is Snow Shadow. It's a very weak color. You have to add a ton of it to another color if you're trying to use it to lighten a color and make highlights. So this is something you can study. I mean, now you know what those terms are. You know that means adding white, that means adding gray, that means adding black. And that's how you get, these colors that don't. There's another one that's pretty much a variation of orange. Maybe it's a variation of the yellow-orange. So hopefully that helps make your color wheel easier to use, because I didn't get that at first. I painted for years before I understood, like, okay, I can still identify some of these colors and figure out how to fit them into my color scheme. Now, a lot of times browns, and like this color, this is close enough to a neutral that I would treat this more like white and black and gray, and not have, it doesn't have to be part of the color scheme, because you get a few powerful colors in a color scheme, and then you probably should just have more neutral colors, or it's going to be like, unless you're making like a jester, or I can't remember what the Games Workshop character race that they have, like Harlequin uniforms and stuff like that. Unless you're doing something like that, you want to not have too many powerful colors happening on your figure. Now, while we're on the color wheel, just because I showed you my big giant one, this is not the only one I bought when I was starting the stream. So this is the big giant version of the one I've been showing you, and it too has the tint, tone, and shade. So it has all the same information. It's just if your eyes aren't great or you have the space, this one will be easier to read. But this little travel one has all the same information, and you can take it to cons and paint nights and stuff like that. There is another color theory, and I'm not really going to get into that today. But if you're someone who thinks that cyan, yellow, magenta is the true color theory and that's the way it works, that's fine. I don't think it matters. It's a way of structuring the information to help you use it. And they kind of did the same thing here. They just did tints and shades. They didn't do tones. So these ones, and they give you a little more information on the tints and shades. So they decided to organize their color wheel with slightly different information. So it shows you how much you lose the color as you start adding white, and how much you lose the color as you start adding black, but you're changing the value more with both of those. So I don't have a problem with cyan, magenta, yellow, and I'll probably talk about it one day, but I kind of, instead of getting into, here's color mixing theory, I'm more trying to address this from, you have paint, how do you make that paint do more stuff that you want to do without knowing whether this is pure phthalo blue, which clearly it does not. Because the problem with using the clears is they're pure color, but they're pretty transparent. And plus, maybe you just want to tweak this a little. Like, you just want to make the darker shade. You don't want to, like, make a whole new color. Some people like color mixing. Some people do not. I know I was thinking of something. I'm trying to remember what it was. There is one more way to dull down a color, and that is to add the color complement. And that's where your color wheel can come in handy again. And this is where these two will differ. So So this one tells me that the color complement of blue is orange. And let's find out what these guys say, and we can try both. So, this one doesn't spin as well. This one tells me that the color well, okay, go ahead and be the same. I know it's not all the same for all of them. I guess we're just mixing orange with this one. But if you look at red, like the type of red that we usually consider to be the complement is green, they're telling me that the complement is cyan. And that's why we're leaving that for another day. But I will go ahead and mix this with orange just to see what happens. Since both of the color wheels tell me that orange is what I would mix with this to dull a color down. Now, in theory, you would get like a perfect neutral if you mix those two together. In the real world, you get something that's kind of desaturated or neutralized. You can get some really pretty grays and browns doing this. But you're not going to get a pure. Wow, yeah, that marigold is really just not very powerful, but I thought it was the nicer orange. It made the nicer, like, it was more of a true orange. This is a slightly off orange, I think. So I wanted to use it to mix with the blue. And you can see it is kind of becoming brown. Let's thin it down. The nice thing about doing this on paper is thinning it down is essentially adding white, but I don't have to add white. I don't have to get out another paint. And there's the kind of, if you had a bit more blue instead, it's definitely browner. But I just wanted to dull this blue down a bit, so we're just going to take a little bit of the orange and the bigger pool of blue. And there's an interesting thing that just happened that I don't know if it was obvious. We might have to go to black and white mode again. So I'm going to take some of the original blue and paint it out beside here. So obviously this is very much less saturated than the original blue. I think they're pretty similar in value, but this is probably darker. So often when you add something other than white, you're making the paint a little darker than it started out. Because let's see, we'll add a little bit of the blue here before I go to black and white mode. So this was where I added the gray that was pretty equivalent to this blue. So my guess is that both this pool and this pool are going to be darker than the unmessed with blue. But let's go into funky mode and find out what happens. My apologies for the disco while we go there. All right, so was I correct? Yes, this is a little darker than this, and this is a lot darker than this, but I might not match the gray exactly to the value of the blue. I think I used this gray. No, it's pretty close. So often when you add something other than white to a color, you are making it darker. So that's important information to have. If you're not trying to change the value, you may need to add something else to keep your value a little lighter. But that it's just, I don't know, it's true with all paints and stuff. It's pure paints as well. When you start mixing stuff together, it gets duller and it gets darker. Ring says, I use a color theory that includes both RGB and CYM, calling them either cool or warm colors. Yeah, a split primary is probably what you're talking about. And split primary, I think, is truly this, but we're acknowledging that these colors are ideals that don't exist. So you need a cool version of this and a warm version of this and a cool version of this and a warm version of that and cool. You can get away with just one yellow as a rule. But if you have like this yellow being so much warmer than this one, it will mix a little differently. So it mixed a truer orange with this red because this yellow is just a little cooler. But that is also a subject for a different day, split primary. So I do want to talk about the idea of a split primary. The original colors I picked out were like that. But this one I'm approaching more from this is the stuff you have. Because we don't have two reds. I mean, this is a slightly cooler red than this, but that's because it's darker more than because it's cooler, I think. It's definitely not magenta, and you want a magenta color or something similar to mix the most colors. I mean, that's where you're going to get into trouble trying to mix purples and stuff. But we're just trying to tweak what we have here. And it'd be a similar thing. Like if I wanted to paint grass or orc skin or something, this is not a great green for that. This is very unrealistic. I would do something similar to the blues. In fact, let's do that. Let's do it with green. And then I'm going to show you a fun little trick. Fun little mixing trick that you might not be expecting. I'm just trying to figure out where the edge of my paper is. So we will mix this with white. We will mix it with neutral gray. We'll mix it with the warm gray. We'll mix it with black. And we will mix it with its color complement. And I suspect that I'm going to need more of the green in all of those things. So I'm not going to, well, all right, we'll do it equal, and then I'll just add more green later if I need to. So that's white. That I was using the darker gray because it was more equivalent to this, I think. So for a more fair comparison of how the color changes. If I were trying to mix and not change the value as much, I would probably use this gray with this green. I think it's interesting since the mountain stone is in the kit, and that is what you would be using to mix, unless you mix pure white and pure black together. Black, that's what I need. And then, so there was some dispute about what the color complement of green was, but we're going to go with the classic, true red. And let's see what happens to this green. So I don't think we're going to be too surprised by what happens when you mix it with white. It gets minty green. Which still might be useful for something, but that is not a color that I want to paint orcs or grass. Mixing it with gray is probably going to get us closer. This is still maybe a little saturated. It would work for some vegetation. I don't know if I think that looks like a convincing non-cartoony green skin tone, which I don't have a problem with a cartoony green skin tone. I'm just saying if you're trying to paint like a gritty, battle-hardened type of orc, not a cartoony orc, you wouldn't maybe be very happy with that color. This color is getting closer, I think. And that's probably because that gray has that little touch of brown in it that is doing that. This is probably going to be way too dark because that black is so powerful. Yeah, we can't even tell that there's green in there. But let's thin it out a little just to see. So you can make very pretty off, not quite blacks by doing this. By mixing just a little bit of a color in. And then this is likely to be brown. And in fact, we're discovering that the red is more powerful than the green because this is much more of a reddish brown than it is a green. But it's entirely possible that this, because it's kind of leaning towards brown, is going to give us the kind of green that is more what I'm thinking about for vegetation or skin. And I think I'm correct. Yeah, the black green's pretty nice. I like that too. So that is much more the type of color that I would want to use on something like an orc or, like that's a little darker desaturated for some grass, but if you're thinking like wasteland grass where it's half dead or whatever, that would be good for that. Now what I actually did in the kit, because in the kit you paint an orc, and we mixed with it, I'm going to say leather brown, but let me just check my guidelines to see what I actually said. And that is... So mixing brown in is also a way that you can desaturate things. It's going to be a little less predictable. It's not like, you mix brown into pink. That's not going to look great. But it's definitely a useful thing to have, particularly since you have so many... You probably have lots of browns whether you bought this kit or not, because many things are brown. That is like the one color that I'm never sad if they make more brown. I'm like, yes, make more brown. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong one. That's why I can't find it. Hold on a sec. Now I'm getting wet paint on things. Because I did that thing that you guys should have told me not to do that. Because I've done it before. All right, the wet paint is now someplace where I can't touch it. Yes, I said mix 1 part Naga green to 1 part leather brown. So let's try that. Brown is the easiest color to mix. Yes, if you recall from when you were a kid and they would give you a bunch of paint on a plate, almost all of us, for some mysterious reason, want to mix all of the colors together. And I don't know what we think we're going to get, like magic unicorn sparkles, but what you get is brown because you mixed everything together and it gets duller and darker. So that would be a lighter version, and this would be a great shadow color for that. And that's interesting to note. So let's try mixing black into this directly. And I bet mixing the black with just the Naga green would give you a nicer shadow color than when I add black to this. Because again, that's probably too much black. We're adding more and more colors together. It's going to get duller and duller. So it's not as colorful. And this is probably what the kit has you do. But I think if you add, I actually don't remember. Sometimes I did figure out that you should just add black directly. So we'll try it this way. Or no, that was with red. Da-da. So that was me forgetting what I was doing. It's just a little bit of red. Quindy says, I always get magical unicorn sparkles when I mix paints. I don't know what you all are doing wrong. Even in kindergarten? Wow. You're good, Quindy. Brown equals magic unicorn sparkles. Brown is so useful that, yes, so it's funny. Every now and then the artist will ask, what we used to ask Anne to mix colors. She doesn't. She's not as conveniently located at Reaper, so we can't get her to do it as much. And you know, Jess Rich had this pretty green that she wanted, and Proctor wanted this amazing purple. And I was like, okay, in my head, when you say brown, the color that I think of, Reaper doesn't have that yet. Even though you have 3 million browns, you don't have that color that I'm thinking of. Could you make that for me? And it's apparently so it's Bender Brown. It's boring ass Bender Brown, because that's how boring I am. So yeah, adding the red to the green, I think gives you a nicer shadow color for the orc skin. And you couldn't have done that in the kit because I didn't give you any red in the kit. Orcs aren't vegetables, but they are verdant. JP Go Rockets? JP Got Rockets. I'm going to go with that. I'm really bad at when people have those fun license plate. I hardly ever get it. In World War II, they used yellow and black to make their olive traps. Well, now you're giving away the fun thing I was going to do. Because, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And if you have the Bones 5mm paint kit, that is totally how I did the khaki greens in that one. Now, again, as we've discussed, yellow is a very weak color and black is a very powerful color. So we are just going to get a little bit of black and mix it into that yellow, and we will make green. And in fact, it's not just in World War II. I'm pretty sure that the masters, you know, the oil painting masters of days gone by, they made a lot of greens by mixing yellow with black. Because interestingly, even today, there are not very many green pigments. So there are tons of different red pigments. There's a fair number of blue pigments. There's quite a few yellow pigments. There just aren't very many greens. And the greens that there are, they're often like this. They're not things you would see in nature. Like you have to mix stuff with them or mix other colors. You know, mix green by mixing one kind of yellow and another kind of blue if you want to get colors that are going to reflect vegetation and natural looking things. Let's try our other yellow with the black. And see what kind of khaki we get with that one. So they didn't have many green pigments in the olden days especially, but even today, we don't have very many natural green pigments. So you have to mix stuff. Yeah, that one's nice too. It's a little brighter. So another thing I think is useful to know about mixing is I've been showing you the tints and the tones, and the color wheel talks about that, where you're using white and black. White and black are not always great things to add to your colors to make them darker or lighter. There are a couple of alternatives, and I didn't bring over a dark blue. But there are several colors you should be mixing yellow with instead of white. Or at least yellow and a bit of white. Green is one of those. So we saw when you mix the white, and I'll do it again on this paper too, I think. When you mix white with it, you get a minty green. So you're losing a lot of the intensity of the green. So if you want to make the green lighter, but keep more intensity, mixing it with yellow is going to work better. And we'll try both our yellows since we have two. I suspect this yellow is going to give like a brighter green. And this is going to make it a little more dirty, desaturated, but we'll find out. So yeah, very minty, unnatural green where you've lost a lot of the vibrancy. And this is, this is a nice vibrant green color. Let's try with yellow instead. And it stays very vibrant. Now the difference is, this probably isn't as light as that. Well, we can do the camera test to check. Elisha Stevens says, you could always crush emeralds and suspend it in linseed oil. Interestingly, pigment doesn't always work like that. Like you see there's really bright blue butterflies and birds and stuff in South America. It's not color. Like it's, if you grind up the wings or the insect carapaces or whatever, you're going to get a muddy block color. It's all to do with refraction and stuff. And so some things can change, like it can be one color when it's a mineral or whatever, and then it's a different color when you grind it up and make it into paint. So both of those, I mean, are so much more vibrant than the version with white. Now, are they darker? Let's find out. I think we can confirm that yes, they are darker, even in these disco crazy modes. They're a lot darker. But now let's add a little bit of white to those. So they're going to be less vibrant, but they're probably going to be more vibrant. In fact, I'll leave it here and see if we can match the value of that one and see what we get. It's still a little darker. But that is lighter than it looks, I guess. Interesting that I do have like a picture I paint on my iPad and stuff. I mean, I use regular paint sometimes too, but I'm lazy and do digital painting a lot. And I have one that I'm working on where I switch to this mode all the time to assess my values because I'm using like crazy, crazy colors. So they're still, I mean, they have lost vibrancy, but adding the yellow is definitely a different effect than just adding white. And then in terms of making things darker, adding the complement is often a good way to do it. A dark blue or a dark brown can work well too. So let's compare adding the Ebony Flesh, which is a dark brown that's in the Layer Up kit, to adding just the straight up black to the green. And I'm gonna do... Actually, I'm going to use this side of my paper because I keep not using this side of the paper because I'm afraid to put my hand in it after I've already started in the middle. I'm going to do let's do three drops of each. Of the green, I mean, because this black is going to be so powerful in comparison that I might still have to add some more green. Oops, that's the wrong brown. And then I'll add 1 drop of the Ebony Flesh. See what we get. And then with the darker colors, I think it's always helpful to add, thin it out so we can get a better idea of the color. So that's with the black. And then this is with the brown. So in this case, I would say it depends on what effect you're going for. That this green actually darkens up with black pretty well. But there is one more color that I would test, which is dark blue. And I have blue liner, which is not a very true blue. But let's try it just to see. It's blue liner. So as you can see, that is it's like blue plus black. That's a very desaturated blue, but it is going to give a bit of a different effect, I think. I'll have to do it down here because I didn't leave enough space. So I very often use like the liner colors and other dark colors. I hardly ever mix shadows with black. Purple would actually be interesting to try too, but the only purples I have handy are insanely intense purples. So yeah, even though that's not a very rich blue, it kept a lot more of the green. So using blue as a shadow with green works really nicely. With the yellow, you have to be a little careful because depending on the kind of green that you're doing, it can almost shift it to yellowy. And then you're getting more of a color change than, highlight shadow situation. But I would put a little yellow in with white if I were wanting to keep, wanting to avoid like too yellowy of a look. I would still use some yellow when I mixed highlights for green. JP Got Rocket says you could use ebony to take it darker or ivory to make it lighter. This was the ebony. So this one was the Naga green with the ebony flesh. The ivory, I don't think it'd be too, well, that's bleach linen, which is kind of like ivory, I guess. I don't think it'll be too much different. What else do we have? Yeah, we've got desert sand and bleach linen. So why not we'll go ahead and try those to experiment with some more highlights as well. And since I did these pretty close to one, I did that 1-to-1, I'll do the same thing and see where we are. Elijah 7 says, I remember a project in color theory where the entire picture had to be tonally equal. It would almost completely disappear when seen in the black and white mode on a video camera. That is interesting. And I've noticed a lot of the European painters are using that as a form of contrast. So that would be pure saturation contrast, where the only difference you're putting between the colors is saturation. You're not using value. Well, saturation and hue. And I've seen a lot of the European painters using that to add some definition. Like say, this side of my face was an even darker shadow. So this side is lit. But we'll imagine that this side was like really shadowed. But you'd still want to, the way my nose goes up there, or the top of the cheekbone, or where the jawline pokes out, or, especially up here, depending on where the light's coming from, you might still want to accent that and make it clearer what the anatomy is, particularly on a miniature because it's smaller. One way to do that would be to do what Elijah's talking about, where you're aiming to use a color that the value isn't very much different. This is all still going to be dark. I'm just using a color with different saturation from the overall tone. So it's going to stick out visually, but if you put you looked at it in black and white, it would fade away, so that you aren't changing the light scenario at all. You're just pulling something out with a different kinds of contrast. And if you go on my blog, you should be able to get there from this main page. There's a catalog of contrast. And I talk about all the different, so we think about, the value thing, how light something is, how dark something is. And we're also very good at thinking about hue. So like someone said, this is very Christmas. If I put that red there, that's contrast of hue. That's why Christmas colors work so well and have stuck in the imagination so much, because they're color complements, and each one makes the other one kind of vibrate and attract attention. So those are the kinds of contrasts that we're most are most intuitive, even if you're not like an artist person. And we're actually pretty bad about value. Most of us tend to default to hue, the Christmas thing. Because if you look at Christmas stuff, you do that black and white trick, you'll find a lot of Christmas stuff is really dark because the red is dark, that pine green is dark. There's not a lot of value contrast in Christmas. Christmas colors and design, I'm not talking about. Elijah Stevens, yeah, simultaneous contrast. And that's not great from the point of view of a miniature. It's better to have that hue contrast, and then your green's a little darker than your red, or your red's a little darker than your green. And then we have the problem of like Christmas stole those colors. So we have to do stuff like this. You have to shift your green a little so that it's not as Christmas, or you have to shift your red a little. So, like use these two get together, that's still kind of Christmas. But, you use those two together, you're diluting the Christmas. It's not going to come to people's minds as much. So this is with the bleached linen, and that it is a little softer. It doesn't kill it as much as the white. So this is a nice mixing color. All those off whites that Reaper has, stuff like linen white, and you've probably heard people on the forums or the Discord or whatever go on about these, and this is why, because they will tend to not do that as much. Like the white kind of kills the color, and if you use an off white, you'll get a lot less of that. In this case, this Osiris sand is kind of one of my new favorite, off whites for mixing layers and stuff. This would probably be nice because it's a little bit of yellow in there, so it would kind of do what I was doing there. And you can play with, so another kind of contrast is cool warm, and you can play with that with your highlights and shadows, but that is also a story for another day. So even just, this is just a simple set of 22 paints, and we haven't even looked at the metallics, so we're ignoring like 4 or 5 of the paints because we haven't even looked at the metallics. You can get a lot of different color variations. You can tweak the colors a lot to customize them, or, mix up your color schemes, or make things more the way you're envisioning in your head. You don't have to be able to make an exact color to like thinking of color mixing as matching colors is the path of frustration. I want to, for some, this is like an orangey brown, so I want to go back to my blue for a minute. So it's not an exact color complement, except it kind of is, because when we looked at the color wheel, this was still in the orange section. It's just the dulled down shade version of orange. So it's still a color complement of this. It just also has some black in it. So I'm just curious what that does compared to when we mixed it with the true orange and got those colors. And I forgot to do that when we were on the blue page. Hi, Cat Master. We are looking at color mixing. Oh, we have Raiders too. I think it's, oh, there it is. And JP Got Rocket said, vibrating paint's good to use if your hands shake, I guess. One cancels out the other. Well, in the case of compliments, they don't cancel each other. They kind of egg each other on, almost. That's why if you look at like magenta and certain kinds of blue-green or cyan, that's another one that it sort of vibrates. It'll make your eyes hurt. So that very much made a brown with roughly equal mixes. A little bit of a greeny brown. So you can get a lot more browns than you thought too out of basic colors, because you just start mixing stuff together. It's bound to turn to brown more often than not. But let's put a little more of the blue back in. See what kind of desaturated of a blue it was. So for the people who've joined a little later, I'm taking, Reaper has 2 Learn to Paint kits that I wrote, and each of them has 11 colors in them. Neither of them is like a full set of colors, but if you put them together, they're a full set of colors, other than purple. So I'm taking those colors and kind of playing around and showing you ways you could mix shades or mix different colors, or, this blue is too desaturated, so you want to get different colors for your uniforms of your town's guard or something like that. How you can do that without having to go buy a bunch of new colors. But also, I'm encouraging the idea of not trying to mix to match colors, because that path lies the way to frustration if you are not a person who's very familiar with art and color theory and using colors. But if you think of it more as mixing colors to match your function, your goal of what you're trying to do with the colors, instead of trying to mix exact colors, I think you will find it less frustrating. So we looked at the blue and the green. Does anyone have an opinion about some colors you'd like me to mess around with? JP got rockets. Lower the portcullis, shut the doors, fill them out with alligators, cancel the circus, and pull out the cat. The raiders are upon us. The cat was at the beginning of the show, and then she wandered away. Elijah Steven 7 says, invite them in, give them some milk and cookies, and set them up on the couch with a purring cat and a fire in the fireplace. I like that approach better. But again, my purring cat has left the room. She may return. It's fun. I expected her to bother me a lot more when I was doing streams than she ends up doing. If she could adopt her winter place. So this one cat we have is really hilarious. She thinks she's gonna die when it's lower than 70 degrees. She's very much likes heat, so she just starts curling up next to the heat vents when it's like anything lower than 70, and that's outside because I keep it at 72 inside. So, but it's like she knows. So she kind of has summer mode and winter mode. And winter mode is mostly just that cat that you saw at the beginning of the stream glued to a heat vent. So I've been trying to think if there was a way to hook up an extra camera where we could switch to kind of cat view. Rings thinks I went all the way around the color wheel. I think there's lots. We ignored all the cool reds, because that is where this falls apart, is that I don't have a magenta or a purple. So we can't do a lot in that area. But I was talking about the highlights, highlighting with yellow as opposed to white. And I think it is red is another color that I advise that with. So let's, real quick, before we stop for the day, mix it with, where's my white? Mix it with white. Okay, I accidentally grabbed pure white, so that's not technically the white that's in the kit. And then mix it with each of the two yellows. Now it's going to be too orange. But then if we do that thing I did with the green, where you have it with white and orange. In fact, why don't we'll just jump ahead. Spoiler alert this. And have both. So this is my suggestion if you're trying to get highlights for red. And this is something I do buy out of the bottle. And now I think is it Red Dust? I think Red Dust is the current Reaper color that I really like for highlighting red. So yes, as we all probably know, if you add white to red, you get pink. And you kill the color a lot. We killed the color a lot with the green, but it's interesting. There's this whole language theory about color. In English, we still think of this as green. We kind of start thinking of this as a different color. Like pink is a different color from red. In terms of color theory, it's just a lighter version of red. But as people describing colors, I think most of us think of pink as a different color. So what's interesting is in Russian, my understanding is they have two words for blue. There is light blue and there is dark blue, and it's a similar thing with English and red. In fact, if anything, I think it's more intense in that those are two different colors. Dark blue is a different color than light blue. Just like a lot of us would think of pink is a different color than red. So you can see that I kept more of the red when I used a bit of white and a bit of yellow. So green and red are two colors that I recommend. You don't have to use all yellow, but I recommend including some yellow when you're mixing highlights or lighter versions of those two colors. And then I should have done shades for red, because that's interesting, actually. It can accept a lot of different shades. But we will call that enough color mixing for one day, because I think, yep, we're about at time. Cat Master said, I had some random mixing colors fun in the stream for about 30 seconds while I made froth for beer. Thank you for putting up with this. I hope you found it remotely interesting. I do want to do more color mixing videos in the future. Maybe I'll be a little clearer. I don't know. I do want to talk about the split primaries. Somebody's talking about a split primary palette, which was originally when I was going to do this, I was going to use split primary colors and then show you different ways to desaturate them, which we did talk about, you know, the gray, black, white, brown, and so on, complements. But it would probably also be good to explain what split primaries are and how they might help you, because I know a lot of times people want to know what's like the smallest amount of paints you could have if you're traveling or you can't afford to buy a lot of paint or whatever, and split primaries are kind of the answer to that question. So it's worth investigating on that front. But thank you all so much for joining me. I think Quinny will find us a raid. But remember, if you want to do this yourself, you can write down what you're doing so you're going to remember, which I did not, but I have done in the past. So for those who weren't here before, this was kind of partly what gave me the idea to do this. Is I had this sheet from when I was mixing the 12 colors that were in the Bones Learn to Paint kit, because I had to paint 12 miniatures, and eventually I started running out of color ideas. So I was like, okay, what can I, all right, there, now we got Maroon. That gives me another possibility for a miniature. We're going to raid Tule 81, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day and enjoy watching some more fun Twitch stuff. Thank you, Quindy, so much for your help. Bye, everybody.